I played a game of wiffle ball last night. And I was thinking about it yesterday as I drove away from church after having played. I hated gym class when I was growing up. I hated participating, and what really was terrible about that was that I was naturally good at certain sports. But I was so scared to fail in front of my peers that I didn't step forward, that I just stood in the back, and I let those natural gifts, I just put them away because it was too much pressure to deal with, failing or succeeding in front of other people. And last night, I got to play one inning of wiffle ball. I cranked it out of the park twice. I was 2 for 2 hitting, and I made the game-winning catch. And it really made me sad to think that there were so many years of my childhood and of my life where I was just too scared to fail, too scared to get out there and try. And I really sacrificed my natural abilities, for that fear. And I wish I could go back and tell my younger self that it's worth it. It's worth it to go out and make mistakes, because good things can come out of those mistakes too, and you might even have a great moment.
The meaning of life. That is a fascinating topic. You can get very esoteric with that, if I can use some big words in here. If you want to be sort of towards the scientific side, you might use the standard 4 categories that are usually used to develop one's personal worldview. And that would be origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And those 4 topics, one could wax eloquent on those for a long time. Very important. But nowadays, at my advanced age, I think that it's a good idea to make it a little more personal, and I think some of the things that really give you meaning in life, some of the things that really are important, are not so much scientific, not so much cognitive, but they're kind of an emotional / spiritual thing. One of them would be family. There is no question the value of a family. I think you can talk to anybody who has had a family upbringing. They know their dad and their mom. And of course, I realize a lot of times families are constructed differently, but at the heart of it, there's this unit, and there's a sense of safety and a sense of possibilities. There's a positive ring to it, and just about all of your successful scientists, educators, athletes, all these people have come from good families in some way or another. They've had that. A corollary to that is relationships. That expands out from the family, right? And where do you find your relationships? Well, that's a big question. You're not going to find your relationships in trendy spots, like crashing the bar every night or something like that. That's not where you're going to find relationships. Where you're going to find those is in places where people are very aware of how valuable a relationship is, like in a church or in a school or in a club or something like that. And there's a real power in being part of a group, because you get an identity, not from the group, but you get a way of identifying who you are. And relationships it's often said that really people only have maybe 2 or 3 really close friends their whole life. It's about all we can handle, and that's a good thing, because those are relationships that will last you your whole life. Places where you can go for help, for encouragement, and all that. That's very important.
I think in terms of grief, there's a lot of really smart people have written a lot of really good books about grief, and so I won't try to do that. But I'll just kind of tell you from experience that one of the most frustrating things for people in grief is that we want grief to be a linear process, that we start here and we end here, and it's just sort of we go up this thing, and you can think about all the different ways people have talked about that, the stages of grief and all. But the reality is they all sort of depict it as a set of stairs, that you go up one step and then up the next step and then up the next step, and you're sort of, while hard and sad, you're sort of continually making progress. And that's just not how I've experienced grief personally or in ministry. It's more like sort of a series of sort of swirls that you go forward for a while and then you go back for a while and then you go forward for a while and back for a while, because at any one moment you might feel like, oh, I'm really finding healing, and then like either a day later or a moment later you're like on the other side of it and you're like, I'm worse than I ever was. What's the matter with me? And it's because we have this idea of a linear process when in fact it's not. It's just this crazy wild ride that you can only measure movement toward healing over time. You know, you can't do it in a day, you can't do it in a month, and probably not even in a year. All you can do is say, over that time, do I find that I'm closer to healing than I was, closer to healing than heartbreak, and just to reaffirm to people that it's just really natural, and nobody can tell you how your grief should be. Yeah, we have all these commonalities. We have these, you know, you'll experience sort of, bargaining or denial and all these things that generally are true. But how you experience them, the frequency with which you experience them, and the intensity of each experience, nobody can tell you. It's incredibly, incredibly personal.
It's on? Ready? This whole time you've been filming me in my pensive state? Excellent, Rachel. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, forgiveness. I would say if I had to leave behind, is that what you're asking? Leaving behind some words of wisdom on forgiveness. This is something I've struggled with, actually, quite a bit in the last probably 10 years with one particular instance. And held on to the anger for a very long time, and it affects every piece of your life. If you can't forgive, it's the anger and the what it does to your soul, your happiness. It kind of just seeps the happiness out of you. It's just, you have to move on. You can't hang yourself up on what people have done to you. You have to know that at some point you have to take your happiness in hand, and you have to own it, and that means you have to just put all the past behind you and forgive.
I think the selflessness is something that strikes me the most. It's one of the things I work hard to teach the youth around me or small children. And it amazes me of how much stuff you have to actually teach. Everything in your life has to be taught. And if one of the things that I can teach people is the selflessness, then I think the ultimate goal has been accomplished. There's no better accomplishment to me than to see somebody giving their total self without anything in return.
I think a part of society that I've struggled with, and I think maybe others struggle with too, is if the feeling, especially of people in my generation, I feel like we just lack awareness. We can lack awareness of self. We can lack awareness of others, I think, in particular. When you walk through the mall or you walk through the grocery store, you see people on their phones, you see people with their faces in the screens. And when we do that, we miss a lot. But it's this addiction. I feel like it's this need to be connected, but it's not really being connected. And that's the community that we desire and that we seek. But for some reason, growing up in the child-centric generation, I was born in 1985. Everything was about how to raise your kids correctly, how to raise your kids right. And I had toys, I had, games, I had shows, I had everything I needed in order for me to develop, in the correct way. But there was all this pressure. If you go through school, you get A's, you go to college, you do well, and then you're just dropped off afterwards into this abyss, it can feel like. And I have friends who are still looking for jobs. And that pressure can feel like it's crushing you. The feeling like all your life you were taught you can be anything you want to be, but you don't know how at that point to jump into that being if no one will hire you, or something bad happens or you make a mistake. It's all this, everything is contingent upon you making the right choice at the right time. And I think that pressure has not only caused some in our society to give up completely on the path that they had put in front of themselves, but I also think that for the rest of us who are capable and skilled and well educated, I think it's helped to defeat some of us in our generation. You see depression, you see self-criticism a lot, and I think that really leads to this feeling of needing community but not knowing how to get to it. And that's why we're all so into Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, because it's this feeling of finally I can be what I want to be, which is to be accepted or to be liked. But it's not real in a way. It's just very surface level. But I think that going forward, what we all need is not to be more connected in those ways. What we need is real relationship and real community. And I think that for our generation specifically, that means putting down the screens, stepping away from behind the computer. I have a lot of faith in our generation and in the generation younger than me. But until we get to the point of truly learning how to be with one another and be honest with one another, I think we're going to struggle.
The most important thing, in my life, I've been married twice. The first one, I was married to a wonderful woman, and I just wasn't ready to be married. I was very selfish and self-centered. Didn't think about her at all, and it didn't work. I had 2 children by that marriage, and I think they were cheated out of a lot because of my selfish and self-centeredness. Second marriage, I learned a lot from that first marriage, and I learned, that life is very short, and in marriage, the longer I've been married to her, the more I love her, and the more I care about her. And it's not the looks, it's not the stuff, it's the togetherness and sharing each other's hearts and knowing each other, and it's the best. It's the best.
What I would share, I think Coach Isaacs has said it best in regards to incorporating biblical principles within our athletic programs, and that is care more about others than you do yourself. That in itself brings joy to everyone's lives, because by a means of being selfless, you find a means of existence. You find a purpose, and it is my belief that, and through my faith, that every person is given a gift, and it's awesome to find what it is that you were meant to do, regardless of whether it be teaching, helping others, being a carpenter, being a shoveler of dirt, being a French fryer, whatever that might be. The ability to give joy or have joy in helping others would be, I would say, the greatest task in anyone's life, as a means to finding what it is that you were meant to do, and then to use that gift as a means of helping others.
Aging is really good if you're wine or cheese. Aging doesn't matter if you were Groucho Marx or Dick Clark, or for that matter, George Burns. Aging, they say sometimes, is just a state of mind. The hard part's understanding what the capital is. Aging beats the alternative. Aging, frankly, is a little bit subtle and a lot of bit shocking. You don't even notice erosion on a beach, in the mountains, in a landmass, until you wake up one day and that ground is gone. That's pretty much the whole process of erosion and the whole process of aging, right? It doesn't just take a big chunk all at once, but little by little, whether they're crow's feet or a couple extra wrinkles, or the little bruise that used to heal so quickly when you were 5 doesn't heal as fast when you're 50. Or you still think you can play softball and you really can for a whole day, but it takes 3 days to recover. You can still stay up all night with the best of them, but it can take like a month to finally feel like you got your equilibrium back. It beats the alternative. And honestly, because it does go on in such a very slow but methodical and consistent way, the best part about it is it does give you a chance to adjust. Because nothing comes to the mail and says, by the way, tomorrow you're going to feel 5 years older, 50 pounds heavier, and 3 steps behind everybody else. You just find yourself pacing along with everyone else. The best thing about aging is that you still feel 10 years younger than your driver's license photo. And I think that's where a lot of people say it's all up here. This is the container that is going to show a little denting and wearing and tearing around the edges as you go along. But that's because it's protecting the stuff on the inside. Where youth is eternal, and you can still agree to grow old but not to grow up. And in that regard, it is all good. And if that's the contract under which we're living, where do I sign?
Yes, no, I did an awful lot. When I think of all the places that I did go to, it's sort of scary now. Not knowing, gee, I remember living in New York, Chicago, Minneapolis, and not knowing where I was going to live, where I was going to work. But I always managed to land a good job. I worked at first-class hotels. I was always a receptionist, and met a lot of nice people. As I mentioned back then, things were a lot different than they are now, a lot safer. But out of 8, I was the only one who ventured off, and looking back, it's a little scary now, but I'm glad I did what I did. Life is a adventure, I guess, and I have a feeling you're going to have a nice one too, Rachel.